She was never invited back. Not for a cameo, not for a tribute, and not even after the ratings dipped and the applause moved on. One moment she was Carson's golden girl, and the next she was invisible. No explanation. Just a silent, brutal exile. And she wasn't alone. A handful of stars also ended up on the wrong side of Johnny Carson's smile. When Johnny turned cold, Hollywood turned its back. What kind of late-night king builds an empire on charm and fear? That's exactly the story worth telling. There was a time in Hollywood when one show held the keys to everything. If you wanted to be seen, this was the place. If you wanted to be taken seriously, you only had to land that 5-minute slot. And if you crushed it, life changed overnight. But there was a catch. That spotlight came with rules that no one dared to say out loud, but everyone understood. You never wanted to get on the bad side of the man running that stage, because once you did, you were out. Some of the biggest names in the industry found themselves suddenly locked out, not because they weren't talented or because the audience didn't love them, but because Johnny Carson decided they didn't belong anymore. And once Johnny turned his back on you, so did the rest of the industry. The thing is, most people watching at home never saw any of this. They just tuned in for a laugh. But behind the jokes and applause was a quiet tension. One wrong move, one misread moment, and it was over. Sometimes it was something simple, like a guest going too far with a joke or not letting Johnny get the last word. Other times it ran deeper, rooted in loyalty issues and business decisions that felt like personal betrayal. And then there were feuds that started off camera and ended in complete silence. What made it even more intense was how subtle everything was. Nobody got called out publicly. There were no dramatic fights or messy headlines. People just stopped showing up. And if you asked around, you got a shrug or quiet, you know how it is. But for those on the receiving end of that silence, it was devastating. Years of work could vanish with one missed invitation. Being banned from Carson wasn't just bad for your ego. It could cost you your entire career. It's hard to fully explain just how big The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson really was unless you lived through it. This wasn't just a late-night talk show. It was the place to be, especially if you were a rising star, a nervous stand-up comedian, or a Hollywood heavyweight with a new film to plug. If you landed a spot on that couch, you were made. Johnny had this way of making everything feel effortless. His sly grin, the way he let a punchline sit for just half a second longer than you expected. His timing was something that simply couldn't be taught. And then there was Karnak the Magnificent, dressed like a dollar store fortune teller, holding sealed envelopes to his head and delivering jokes that somehow got funnier because they were so ridiculous. It was goofy and weird, but it was also completely iconic. The real power came in how easily he could launch a career with one nod, one laugh, and one simple wave inviting a guest over to the interview chair after their set. That Carson wave was the holy grail. David Letterman and Jerry Seinfeld both said that moment changed everything for them. Millions of people tuned in every single night. This was before streaming, before watching clips on your phone. You watched Johnny when he was on, or you missed it entirely. His format, the monologue, the sketches, the guests, the musical act, has been copied ever since. Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, Stephen Colbert, all of them are working from the blueprint Carson created. He didn't just host a show. He invented late-night television as we know it, and he ran that empire for 3 decades. But when the cameras stopped rolling and the applause faded out, a different version of Johnny emerged. Behind the charm and the jokes, things weren't nearly as smooth. If you got on his wrong side, there would be consequences. You wouldn't just be cut from the show. You were cut from the entire conversation. Losing Carson's approval could flat out ruin you. Getting banned from The Tonight Show back then was like being erased from the industry's memory. Bookers would stop calling. Studio executives would get cold feet. Other shows kept their distance, afraid of stepping on Johnny's toes. He didn't have to say a word publicly. His silence was loud enough. Everyone just knew that if Carson was done with you, you were done. Some comedians tried to brush it off. Rich Little, a legendary impressionist, got the boot for making fun of Johnny too many times, even though the official line was that his material had gone stale. Dana Carvey did a spot-on Carson impression while promoting Wayne's World. Carson didn't find it funny, and Carvey was banned just like that. The scariest part was that there was never a clear rulebook. You never knew where the edge was until you'd already fallen off it. If there was anyone Johnny Carson truly took under his wing, it was Joan Rivers. Back in the 60s, she was a fresh, no-nonsense comedian with a sharp wit and a fire in her belly that drew Johnny to her immediately. He brought her on The Tonight Show at a time when female comedians weren't exactly the norm, and he made her a regular. More than that, he gave her a shot at national stardom after she had been told she was washed up at just 31 years old. Joan had been grinding in the clubs, barely scraping by, when Carson brought her on and she absolutely slayed her first set. He turned to the camera, grinned, and told America, "You're gonna be hearing a lot about this girl." That one line changed everything overnight. He hired her as a writer, mentored her, championed her, and eventually brought her in as his permanent guest host when he took nights off. To the outside world, it looked like a dream duo. But behind all the laughs and applause, a storm was quietly brewing. In 1986, Joan got an offer from Fox to launch her own late-night show. It was groundbreaking. Fox was a brand new network, and this was a chance for her to become the first woman to host a major late-night talk show. She didn't take the decision lightly. According to her own interviews, Joan was terrified. She didn't want to hurt Johnny, but she also knew that NBC had no plans to give her The Tonight Show when Carson eventually stepped down. She wasn't even being considered. So she took the Fox deal. But the part that changed everything was that she didn't tell Johnny first. Carson found out through the grapevine. He was furious in the coldest, most calculated way possible. He hung up on her when she called and refused to speak to her ever again. He didn't return her letters. He didn't acknowledge her efforts to reach out for years. From that moment, she was out. Not just off the show, she was banned and blacklisted. Worse still, anyone who appeared on her Fox show wasn't welcome on Johnny's couch either. Insiders said Carson felt blindsided. To him, it wasn't about the new show itself. It was about loyalty. He believed she had gone behind his back, and in Carson's world, that kind of betrayal simply wasn't forgivable. Joan, for her part, was heartbroken. In interviews years later, her voice still cracked when she talked about him. She called him the single most important figure in her career. She said she wrote him a letter every year hoping for a response, but nothing ever came back. Carson made sure her name was erased from the Tonight Show history. For decades, clips of her appearances were buried and her name wasn't mentioned. She once said, "I would have done anything to make it right. I just wanted to talk. But he wouldn't even look at me." When Carson passed away in 2005, Joan admitted she cried not because the world had lost an important figure, but because she had lost her mentor and the first man who ever truly believed in her, and they never got the chance to reconcile. Not every ban came from deep personal betrayal. Some people simply didn't know when to stop. Bobcat Goldthwait, with his loud and unpredictable energy, took it too far one night when he actually lit a chair on fire on live television. The network was furious, and he was banned from the show. He was also arrested and convicted of arson, fined over $3,000, and sentenced to record public service announcements about fire safety. That one stunt ended his chances with late night for good. Howie Mandel made a different kind of mistake. He brought a giant stuffed tiger on stage without clearing it with producers first, thinking it would get a laugh. But Johnny hated surprises, especially ones that messed with the rhythm of his show. After that night, Howie was never invited back. No formal ban, no angry letter, just silence. Then there was Lola Falana, who made the mistake of speaking openly about racism in the entertainment industry during an appearance. She was honest and bold, but Johnny wasn't ready for that kind of conversation on late-night television. And just like that, she was gone and never got another invite. Carson's feuds weren't always quiet either. For a while, he and Wayne Newton shared an old-school showbiz camaraderie. But things turned when Newton outbid Carson for partial ownership of the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. To Newton it was business, but to Carson it felt like a personal challenge. Rather than confront him privately, Johnny did what he always did and turned it into material. Night after night, he slipped digs into his monologues, poking at Newton's appearance, questioning his masculinity, and calling him mean-spirited. Eventually Newton had enough. He stormed into NBC studios, found Carson backstage, and told him straight up to stop. Carson dropped the jokes, but he also dropped the friendship. Wayne Newton was never invited back to The Tonight Show again. Off the stage, Carson's personal life was equally complicated. He was married 4 times, and each relationship carried its own story of distance and quiet collapse. He admitted to infidelity during his first marriage and joked about his divorces on air with a kind of sarcasm that barely concealed the sadness underneath. His relationship with one of his sons from his first marriage was also publicly strained, and when that son died in a tragic car accident in 1991, the grief was visible on Carson's face the next time he appeared on television. When he finally retired in 1992, he didn't stick around. He moved to Malibu, spent time on his yacht, and refused almost every interview request. He simply disappeared. And yet the legend never faded. He received a Peabody Award in 1987 celebrating 25 years of hosting, and by the mid-70s, he was the highest-paid personality on television. His influence never retired with him either. You can still see his fingerprints all over modern late-night television. The monologues, the desk bits, the casual banter with guests, it's all Carson's original recipe. Everyone since has just added a little seasoning. He could be cold, controlling, even cruel at times. But he was also a master of his craft and a genuine cultural force. He shaped the way America ends its day, with a little humor, a little gossip, and a whole lot of style. And that's the strange, enduring magic of Johnny Carson. You didn't have to know the man to feel like